Hello and welcome to Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans, True Aussie Murders Caffeinated. I'm your host, Belinda Brady, and welcome to episode 3. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited you are here and listening to my podcast. And if this is your first episode with me, I already have 2 episodes up and running. If you would like to download and listen to them, I would very much appreciate it. And if you have any feedback, guys, on my episodes, please, any thoughts, please reach out. I would love to hear from you all. Now, as I have said, this is episode 3, and I'm sticking with early 1900s in Australia for this murder, and it is very early 1900s for this murder. And the episode is titled Who Killed Bertha Schippan? And full disclosure, guys, before we go any further, this episode discusses a very brutal and horrific and bloody and gory murder in detail. So if this isn't your thing, then I'm not your girl and this episode is not for you. But if this is your bag, then let's get ready to discuss Who Killed Bertha Schippan, and it is a doozy of a tale. Now, my sources for this episode are adelaideaz.com and slsa.sa.gov.au and abcnet.au. Now, important stuff first, my drink of choice for this episode. I'm drinking black coffee. Yes, I am a black coffee girl unless I have a giant latte, but today I'm having a coffee with white chocolate syrup, and yes, it is going down an absolute treat. So let's get started with today's episode, Who Killed Bertha Schippan? So get your coffee, get your drink of choice and settle in because I have a tale for you. Now, today's murder story takes place on New Year's Eve 1901 on an isolated farm in the South Australian town of Twitter. Now, Twitter was a tiny German farming settlement just outside the famous wine area of Barossa Valley in South Australia. Now, the remaining children of Johann, often referred to as Mathis, but for this episode I will be referring to him as Johann, and Joanne Schippan are spending the night at the farm alone, and their parents are visiting relatives in Eden Valley, a town approximately 20 kilometres or 12 and a half miles away. Now, on the farm were brothers 15-year-old August and 18-year-old William, who was sound asleep in a shed outside the property, while 14-year-old Bertha and her sister 24-year-old Mary shared a bed inside the house. There were 2 other Schippan children in the family as well, Fritz and Henrik, but they had moved out. Now, according to Mary, she had woken up at around 10:30 p.m. to find a bearded man trying to attack her, and after a struggle, Mary had managed to break free and ran from the house, a blood-curdling scream from her sister, Bertha, following her, because remember, Mary and Bertha were sharing a bed. Now, Mary woke her brothers up, who at first thought Mary had simply suffered a nightmare. But after realising she was deadly serious, young August ran to the nearest neighbour over half a mile away and begged for help. Unbelievably, the neighbour refused to accompany the terrified team back to his house and sent him on his way. Mind-blowing. Anyway, August made his way back to the farm, and with no sign of their sister Mary and the trio, too terrified to go back into the house in case the bearded attacker was still in there, the trio walked over a kilometre, which is close to a mile, to the house of District Constable Alfred Lambert, who returned with them to the farm to see what was going on. There in the blood-splattered house, they found the body of 14-year-old Bertha on the floor of her parents' bedroom. Bertha had suffered a brutal and violent death, having been stabbed and slashed about 40 times. A newspaper article from that time stated Bertha's throat had been severed from ear to ear by 3 different cuts, and she had stab marks on the back of her neck as well as her cheek. With absolutely nothing to go on, and with Father Johann stating that the family had no enemies that he knew of, and no witnesses apart from Mary, who was in bed with Bertha when the attack took place, the finger was very quickly pointed at Mary, and she was eventually and quickly charged with the brutal murder of her sister Bertha. But did she do it? That is the million-dollar question, and that is what we will look at in this episode. But as always, guys, we go back to the beginning because there is always a beginning in every single story. This one is no different, and we will go back to the beginning of this family who entered 1902 in the most horrific way. Johann Matthias Schippan was born on the 15th of December 1850 in Brandenburg, Germany, to parents William and Anna. The family immigrated to Australia in 1854 when Johann was 4 years old. From what I could find, South Australia is where his parents stayed until they died, with his mum dying at a young age of 60 in 1911, but Dad going on to live a longer life, dying at the age of 85 in 1941. Now, Johann had a bit of trouble with the law in his younger years, and in 1896 he was in trouble with the police for shooting and wounding a person. Now, the story goes that Johann went to a party to collect his young son and daughter, and at this party were three brothers by the names of Karl, Herman and William Radumi. Now, apparently this party was full of young Germans, loud young Germans living it up on a Sunday night and disturbing the peace in the very quiet tiny town of Twitter. Now, after a bit of a verbal altercation, Johann was hit with sticks and stones by the trio of brothers, and after giving chase, he shot Karl in the leg. He was later found not guilty, but let off with a warning about the use of firearms. Now, apart from this one incident, it appeared Johann led a pretty quiet life, worked hard, looked after his family, and, shot neighbours who partied too loudly on a Sunday night. Mum Joanna was born on the 9th of April 1844 in Prussia, Germany, and that is Prussia, and the family immigrated to San Francisco in September 1851. Now, I couldn't find any info on how the family came to be in Australia, but she got here in the end, and she married Johann on the 23rd of July 1874. Her and Johann settled in Twitter and went on to have children Pauline, Maria, who is often known as Mary, Karl, Henrik, August, William and Bertha. My goodness, they had big families. And the family were your ordinary family for that period in time. Hardworking, quiet and stoic. But Dad, Johann, was rumoured to have issues with rage and violence, which would explain the party shooting incident. But apart from that, there was really nothing out of the ordinary to report. Just your average, hardworking farming family until New Year's Eve 1901. So guys, put me on pause. As usual, put me on pause, grab another cuppa and then settle in as we discuss the finer details of what happened on that night and our theories as to who actually did kill Bertha. Okay guys, welcome back. So I have also grabbed myself another cuppa because it is a 2-cuppa episode. And yes, I'm sticking with black coffee with white chocolate syrup. Okay, now let's get into the nitty-gritty of this story. So it's New Year's Eve 1901. Now, just to paint you a picture, New Year's Eve in Australia falls in summer, and it is generally hot and sticky and humid and disgusting. So back then there would have been no fans, no aircon, so they just would have been engulfed in humidity. So just painting a picture for you. So they're not inside freezing as it would be in other countries that have New Year's Eve in winter, where we're bang in the middle of summer. It is hot, it is humid, it is generally pretty yucky. Okay, so it's New Year's Eve 1901. Johann and Joanna are out of town for the night, and brothers August and William are asleep in a shed outside the home, while Mary and Bertha are sharing a bed, and both are asleep in the house. Now, Mary told police that she was woken up at around 10 p.m. to find a bearded man lying across her chest. Mary managed to wiggle free and ran from the house, leaving her sister Bertha behind. And it's worth mentioning here that a newspaper at the time reported at this point Mary heard Bertha screaming, "For God's sake, let me go." Mary went and woke her brothers, who, as I had touched on earlier, then went on to a neighbour's house for help, where young August was sent on his way. And then they went to the house of a local cop, who then went back to the house with the trio and found Bertha dead on her parents' bedroom floor, suffering horrific stab wounds and a cut throat. Now, Mum and Dad, Johann and Joanne, arrived home later that day, and Johann had the awful task of identifying his dead daughter. Bertha was buried on January 3 in nearby Sedan Cemetery. Now, you've got to remember, this is important to note, that things then aren't like they are now, where there would be a coroner on the scene that day and things would start rolling. Things were done differently back then. So the coroner didn't arrive until the 9th of January, over a week after the murder and after Bertha had been buried, to conduct his inquest amongst intense press interest. Now, interestingly enough, this also brought about an Australian media first, with a newspaper outlet buying a car to get any breaking news to the presses quicker and to beat any rival newspaper teams who use horses and bicycles for their travel back to the press to get any hot scoops. So this newspaper outlet actually brought a car and beat them to get the scoop. Anyway, the inquest ran for 2 days and had a jury of 6 men. They discussed evidence, which was 2 knives, a tin bowl full of water and traces of blood-stained towel and clothing that had been found in the house. They also looked at Mary's wounds. She had bruises and blood-stained arms and legs, and of course they had the job of looking at Bertha's injuries. Her throat had been slashed 3 or 4 times by a right-handed person, and thankfully, by some small grace of God, there were no signs of sexual assault. They focused their attention on several small bloodstains which were on a skirt that Mary had said she grabbed when she ran out of the house fleeing the attacker. The family insisted the blood was from a sheep Mary had slaughtered a few days prior. Now, questions were also raised around the clothes Mary was wearing that night. When she ran from the house, she was wearing a pink blouse, but she also admitted to owning a blue blouse. And a blood-stained blue cuff and piece of sleeve was found under Bertha's body. The rest of the blouse was never found. And another thing that put Mary under suspicion was her hair. It was washed. But Constable Lambert, the cop that Mary and her brothers had run to for help, stated she didn't wash her hair at his house. And with her house now a murder scene, she couldn't have washed it. So where did she wash it and why? Did she sneakily wash it after the murder, ridding it of the blood that stabbing someone around 40 times and cutting their throat would surely bring? Like, you're killing someone, you're stabbing them, you're getting blood all over. Your hair's going to cop it as well. You would think there would be a decent amount of blood in her in her hair after such a hideous crime. Surely someone would have noticed it in the moments after. Like, you would be covered in blood. Unless she murdered her sister, had a quick shower and then ran out. Anyway, either way, this just added to the growing suspicion, and Mary was charged with her sister's murder and was made to stand trial. Mary was taken away from her family sobbing and placed in an overnight cell before being transferred to Adelaide, which is the capital of South Australia, for her trial. Mary's trial began in March 1902 and she pled not guilty. The trial ran for 6 days and Mary was represented by leading South Australian barrister Sir Josiah Simon, whose fee was 50 guineas. Yep, 50 guineas. And this was paid by a local farmer who knew and loved the family. Now, there were 2 suspects that the barrister put to the jury, the first being Bertha's dad, Johann. Johann, he had a history of violence and was known to have a bad temper. But why? Why would he kill his daughter Bertha? Now, it was speculated that Bertha saw her father kill a travelling hawker, and a travelling hawker is just another word for a travelling salesman, who had come to the house and was a little too fond, little too flirty with Mrs. Schippan. And Bertha threatened to tell on her dad. So another suspect and theory that the barrister put to the jury, that it was Mary's fiancé, Gustave, who was the killer, and despite having a watertight alibi, he pretty much convinced the jury that he was their man. Now, yes, Mary had a fiancé. His name was Gustave. And from what I could find, he was a bit of a douchebag. He treated Mary poorly. He openly flirted with young Bertha. And on top of this, he was actively chasing another local girl who had wealthy parents. So it seems to me Gustave was on just looking out for Gustave. And public opinion very quickly turned on him, and not undeserved, I might add. And soon enough, he was getting threats and he was being physically attacked on his walk from the lodgings to the courthouse, and eventually needed a police escort. But it was determined that he was in Adelaide that night and his alibi checked out, so he was crossed off the list as a suspect. Johann was also struck off as a suspect, as it was determined that he could not have made the trip back from Eden Valley, murdered Bertha, and then went back to Eden Valley like nothing had happened and wasn't noticed. He was gone, all covered in blood. So they determined it was just not possible for him to make that trip back from Eden Valley, murder his daughter, and then come back without someone going, hey, where's Johann? And at that time, there was no street lights, so he would have gone by horse in the dark, and it simply would not have been possible. So both men were ruled out as suspects, and not long after the case ended, Gustave left town and changed his name. The jury took less than 2 hours to come to a verdict, not guilty. Now, Mary left the court to cheers from the public who had gathered there every day to watch the trial, some 3,000 of them. And she returned home with her parents, where she was quickly protected by the Twitter farming community. And at some point, she moved away from Twitter to a small town where she was known as the Grey Lady. Now, sadly and not surprisingly, she became a recluse, never married, never had children. And she spent time in a sanitarium when she became ill with tuberculosis, and she eventually died from that disease at her older brother's farm near Morgan, South Australia in 1919. Meanwhile, Johann was rumoured to have confessed to the murder of Bertha on his deathbed, with the reasoning behind the brutal murder being that Bertha had threatened to blab on Johann murdering the keen hawker, the keen on Mrs. Schippan hawker. Remember that? He was a bit flirty, a bit overly fond of her. So Johann murdered him, as you do, but it's unclear if that ever really happened. So life went on, and the rest of the family lived their lives as best they could, and all eventually married, had kids, and died. And through those years, and even now, over 100 years and many, many lifetimes later, the murderer of young Bertha has never been identified. So who do you think it was? A jealous and vengeful Mary, sick of her sister flirting with her fiancé and deciding to end it once and for all? Or was it the cheating and untrustworthy fiancé with his eye on a much younger and inappropriate suitor? Did Gustave stop by that night and try something on Bertha, and did it all go horribly wrong? Or was it her dad, Johann, known for his violent past and bad temper? Maybe he lost it when Bertha threatened to tell about him killing the male hawker. Or maybe, just maybe, this might be the most chilling thought of all, was it just some random stranger who killed Bertha, maybe after an attempted sexual assault gone wrong? Or maybe he or she killed her just for the thrill of it, and then snuck off into the night while her terrified siblings ran for help. Only the killer knows the who and the why, and they are long dead. So, I've now given you the facts. I've now given you the evidence. And who do you think killed Bertha Schippan? I'm two minds of it. I think possibly it was Mary. I mean, she was there. Her, parts of her blue blouse with blood was found underneath Bertha's body. And she had motive. She might have been sick of her fiance flirting with her sister. So definitely it does point to her. That is the convenient suspect, definitely. But I also think maybe it could have just been an absolute random attack. A random maybe sexual assault gone wrong, or just a random thrill kill. Who knows? But that poor girl died a horrific death and her killer was never brought to justice. And I just hope that her family could live a happy and fulfilling life as best they could after going through such a horrific thing to happen to their family member. So hopefully, they had a lovely life after all that horribleness that came from the murder of their daughter and their sister. And that's it, guys. That is today's episode of Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans, True Aussie Murders, caffeinated, done and dusted. Thank you so much for listening. I so appreciate you all. And I apologise if my voice has been a bit shaky this episode. I'm getting over a thing that just won't seem to let me go. So hopefully next episode my voice will be back to its loud self. But again, thank you so much for your company, guys, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this case. Who do you think did it? Who do you think murdered Bertha Schippan? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And until next time, guys, stay safe, stay cool, and stay caffeinated.